text. So monarch butterflies, you don't have to worry about keeping up with this. This is a phylogenetic cladogram. It shows how a bunch of these different butterflies are related genetically across deep time. All you need to know is that monarch butterflies are four-footed butterflies. So when you look at them landing on plants, or if you're holding one, or whatever the case may be, you will notice that they are walking around on 4 appendages and not 6. They do, in fact, have 6 appendages, but 2 of them are vestigial, and they hold them close to their body up front. So that's one thing to know whenever you're trying to determine if you're actually looking at a monarch butterfly or not. Another thing to take away from this is that monarch butterflies are legitimate tropical butterflies. Many of the other butterflies that you see in this region, the swallowtails, the sulfurs, a lot of the hair streaks, those are temperate species that from central Florida north, they can overwinter as a pupa in a chrysalis through frost, through cold, through awful weather, and then they can emerge in spring and go about their business. Monarch butterflies cannot do that. They die at temperatures below 32 degrees at any stage of development, including if they are pupating in a chrysalis. So it's important to keep that in mind because that's the reason why monarchs have to migrate en masse and leave the United States and head to Mexico every fall. And so just some basic anatomy. I think most of us know what a monarch looks like. See it's walking around and you can only see 2 appendages on that side and not 3 to confirm that it is in fact a 4-footed butterfly. Just some stuff to keep in mind. And you can keep that in mind when you're looking at some of these other lookalikes. So the viceroy in the middle, a lot of people think they're looking for certain at a monarch butterfly, when in reality they're looking at a viceroy. A viceroy has engaged in a type of mimicry where it looks like a monarch, but it has nothing to do with milkweeds. It lays its eggs on willows, plants in the genus Salix, and it has a transverse line that runs through those other black veins, and monarchs do not have that. The queen butterfly on the bottom can look like a monarch butterfly unless you look, especially at the back side of the wings, and you will see that there are no black venations on the back of the wings, whereas there are black venations on both sides of the wings on monarch butterflies. So just something to keep in mind when you're determining if you're looking at the species or not. The genders are not the same. Males tend to have skinnier veins, and they have 2 prominent black blotches on the back of their wings called androconial scales. Females do not have androconial scales. We now know that androconial scales occur in a lot of different butterfly species, and that these actually act as organs that exude pheromones that aid in attracting mates. We also know that in monarch butterflies that they no longer perform this function, and that these are vestigial also, in addition to the vestigial legs. And so they don't really serve a purpose anymore other than to aid us in identifying if it's a male or not. So very interesting stuff. The monarch life cycle, that's the quick and dirty PowerPoint slide on it, but case in point, usually the first, and I'm going to come back to the other one, usually the first sign of monarchs that you see on your plants is frass, insect poop. That's usually when we start to notice that they're there, but by that point in time, they've probably already been there a little while, because the real first indication that you have a monarch butterfly in your milkweed are going to be these little eggs. These very small, less than a millimeter wide, creamy looking eggs that are usually laid on the bottom side of milkweed leaves. Now, if milkweed resources are in short supply and you have a bunch of females all laying eggs on the same few plants in your backyard, they're likely to be on the top, the bottom, the stem, the flower, all over the place. But if milkweed resources are stable and butterflies are not having to compete with the same few resources, they tend to be only on the bottom side. So after they hatch, which usually only takes a few days, they begin to undergo dramatic, seemingly exponential increases in growth. And by growth, I mean 5 instars. In entomology, insects go through growth spurts called instars. And so in usually 2 to 3 weeks, a monarch butterfly will start as that little dot right there. There's the egg, then there's the first instar, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All in 2 to 3 weeks, and they are just eating and eating and eating and eating milkweeds all the day long, half the night, bioaccumulating cardiac glycosides, or cardinolides, as some people call them, which is the compound in milkweeds, which makes the milkweeds toxic, therefore it makes the monarch butterflies toxic as they grow bigger. Eating styles vary amongst the milkweeds, and it depends on how hard it is for the plant to eat. The plants on the left, which are sandhill milkweed, are a lot harder for them to eat, so they tend to go at them superficially by walking along the plane of the plant and digging in, whereas Asclepias incarnata, the pink swamp milkweed on the right, is much easier for them to eat. And so you may have noticed that monarchs tend to be hanging on leaves that it looks like the leaf broke and the leaf is just kind of swaying back and forth. Well, the leaf did not break under the weight of the monarch. The monarch caterpillar climbed up to the base of the leaf and incised into it and caused all of the vascular pressure from the sap to be released, thereby causing the leaf to flop over. And with all of the vascular pressure gone, it's a lot easier for them to eat it. So that's why they do that. So, metamorphosis. Orlando has a huge problem with this. So whenever they undergo metamorphosis, they like to emerge in the morning. So it could be 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, maybe a little bit later. And then they usually spend 3 to 6 hours sitting around, pumping fluid into their wings, and then allowing their new bodies to dry and desiccate in preparation to fly around. A big issue here in Orlando and in every major city in Florida and throughout the United States is that many of them, if they're pupating adjacent to bright light, will be tricked into emerging in the middle of the night, and then they will pupate they'll pupate and then they'll dry their wings, and then they will fly right to that light at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then continuously bombard their bodies into the light until often they've hurt themselves terminally, and then they're not able to function the following day. So it's a big problem. So if you have an area where you think maybe they're being exposed to light, it's just a consideration to make in your yard whenever you're dealing with these. So non-migratory monarch butterflies usually complete the adult stage of their life cycle in 2 weeks to a month. And so usually by the time a month has passed, the adult monarch is done. They have already reproduced, they've laid eggs on other milkweed plants, and then the cycle begins. This is only true in non-migratory monarch butterfly populations. And the only true monarch butterfly non-migratory populations are deep South Florida, Hawaii, Canary Islands, Northern Africa, Australia, some of the islands off the coast of South America, where they just breed year-round, and that's that. So they can have 4, 5 plus broods per year in some of those places. But most of the monarch butterflies in North America, this is not the case for them. And so for most of the monarchs in North America, they are migratory monarch butterflies. I'm trying, it froze. There we go. So if you go to St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge, well really, if you go anywhere between, say, Inverness or the coast directly adjacent to Inverness, so they're up in Yankeetown, Cedar Key, and all along that Big Bend nature coast, all the way up to St. Mark's and continuing west, this is what you're going to see right now. You're going to go out and you're going to see that lots of plants like saltbush, Baccharis halimifolia, are blooming along the coast, and that monarch butterflies are all over them. We got a big pulse of them over the last 2 days with this rain front that we've had. And so the trees right there at the lighthouse are kind of covered in them, and have been. And so those monarchs have arrived from many and numerous destinations to the north of Florida. And they are migrating south, and they're continuing south all the way to Mexico City. So this is, let's see if this animation works to kind of explain what's going on with the migration. So we'll go ahead and start. Let's go ahead and fast forward to early spring, and the monarchs are coming out of hibernaculum. They're leaving where they hibernated, that blue dot in Mexico City. They head north, and by March or April of the year, the monarchs that overwintered there in Mexico City arrive in Texas, western Louisiana, southern Oklahoma, and when they arrive during that time of the year, their arrival coincides with the first milkweeds of the year sprigging up, and they lay their eggs on those. And those eggs become generation number 1 for the year. Generation number 1 will grow up, become a butterfly, and continue north and east. And typically in the first 2 weeks of May, if you go to roadsides in rural areas or even in urban areas, wherever there are wild milkweed species growing, usually the first 2 weeks of May, you see a sudden pulse where you can go every day and then bam, you go out there one day and there are eggs and caterpillars all over the place across hundreds of square miles, thousands of square miles. Generation number 2 is born, and then generation number 2 continues north and east into the high summer, into the mid-Atlantic and Great Lakes. They lay eggs, they go north. Generation number 4 will occupy that region, which they go as far north as the northern limit of milkweeds in the world. And then something interesting happens during this time of the year. So typically during this time of the year, September, October-ish, temperatures start to cool off in earnest in the northeastern United States, well, the northern United States in general. So what happens is generation number 4 eggs hatch, they become caterpillars, then they pupate, but when they emerge from pupation, generation number 4 has no interest in reproduction whatsoever. The cold weather triggers something called sexual diapause to occur in monarch butterflies. So when they emerge from a chrysalis, all they want to do is eat food and fly south. That's all they care about, and that's what they do. And so generation number 4 makes the entirety of the migration all the way back down through the Gulf Coast, all the way to the Oyamel region just west of Mexico City. Now there's a big question mark right there on Florida, because every year we inch along with our understanding and knowledge of how the migratory populations interact with the non-migratory populations of South Florida. The monarchs that you see here in Orlando are constantly crossbreeding with migratory monarchs that come here. We know that. We know a lot of them come here and come out of sexual diapause and mate here. So we know that there's a percentage of them that come, even though the bulk of them go to Mexico City. And so this is just to kind of show the route that they take. They hug the Gulf Coast, those that don't come down here, and they head west, relying on those coastal wildflower resources, and then don't cut inland until they're in Mexico. And so the journey south is very perilous for them. By the time they arrive at the refuge, many of them show lots of broken wings, partial wings, bite marks, because by the time they've arrived in northern Florida, they had probably already been through awful rainstorms, sleet, possibly snow, lots of wind, lots of automobiles, hungry birds. And so this is an insect that is built for migration to be able to endure and handle that. In Florida, and this includes this region, there are some plants that are of particular importance to them. So saltbush, Baccharis halamifolia, most people probably deem this a weedy native invader, we call them, because they're found all over this region. They're all over town. I pass by just gobbles of them all over the place coming here, even within a quarter mile of the place. And so this is a really important plant for monarch butterflies. Definitely a native you should probably have in your yard if you like monarch butterflies. But this is what they're targeting among other species. And that's just to show the difference between males and females. So males are kind of a dull, unattractive color on the right, and the female plants are white. And it turns out that monarchs are one of the primary pollinators of this plant. This plant requires cross-pollination, just like milkweeds do, and monarchs serve that purpose. Probably why the flowering coincides with the arrival of monarch butterflies. This is what the Oyamel can look like just west of Mexico City. So they get up in these trees, and they're called OAML. The binomial is Aves religiosa. Most people call it the sacred fir. It's a conifer. It's a softwood that grows on these volcanic mountains west of Mexico City, and it creates a very interesting sort of micro habitat where they go there and they amass, and the temperatures do get cold. It gets down close to freezing, but it virtually never freezes. And so it just kind of stays cool all winter long, and then when things start to warm up, they leave. Now those butterfly symbols on there signify all of the best known historical hibernaculums for monarch butterflies. These days, most of those don't exist anymore for a number of reasons. And so that's the journey south. The journey north, as I mentioned, sandhill milkweed is the most important species for them. But anyways, how do we know all this? How do we know where they go, where they're coming from? Well, one of our most useful tools is monarch tagging. Right now, we are tagging at St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge 2 to 4 mornings a week. And so we actually go out there in the dark, in the morning, and look for monarchs that are sleeping on red cedars or sable palmettos. They're 2 favorite trees for roosting at night. So sable palmetto or Juniperus virginianum. The red cedar, that's what they like. That's what they like to sleep on. And we go for it. We trap them, we hunt them, we capture them. And then we torture them by putting stickers on them. We don't actually torture them. They can't feel a thing. Like I said, some people, they're like, there's powder, you're gonna hurt them, you're gonna prevent them from flying. Again, this is a migratory butterfly. That they have wings that are meant to endure all sorts of abrasions. This itty bitty little sticker does nothing. So many of them have been recaptured down the line, closer to Mexico City or in Mexico City. So anyways, this is very reliable because we record the data from the stickers that we put on them, but we also record data when we find monarchs that already have stickers on them. So for example, this one right here, I photographed it before we captured it. We looked up the number, and when we looked up the number, we saw that a person in southern Canada, 977 miles north of that current location, had put a tag on that butterfly 32 days earlier. Wow. And so after you look at many butterflies, you're able to piece this together, especially if you use GIS to plot these things on graphs and to see the sequence of events as they move across the United States or across the continent, moving south. It's very illuminating to see where they're going, and this is pretty empirical data. It's kind of hard to mess this data up. So anyways, monarch butterflies have undergone a crazy decline, as I hinted at earlier. A huge decline such that numerous non-government organizations came together and formed a joint petition to list the monarch butterfly as a federally threatened species. And this has been a number of years ago now. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the federal government as a whole was supposed to deliver a ruling this past summer on if listing was warranted. They did not. They asked for an extension, and so now it's been extended to 2020. Sometime in early 2020, when the federal government is supposed to determine if they are going to list the monarch butterfly or not. Either way, it's going to turn into a controversy. And controversy is not what the government wants, and so the government thinks that since we know that this is a species that we could probably save relatively easily if everyone planted milkweed, let's see what we can do about this during the time period while we're assessing it to see if we can bring its numbers back and keep it from being listed. Because for any of you that are not aware of how long it takes, the average time that it is required for a species to be added to the endangered species list from the time that it's petitioned is between 5 and 7 years. Sometimes 10 years, which is why many species have reached a critical point of being nearly extinct or have become extinct before they're listed during the listing process. So it takes a while. So it's under review, as I mentioned, and let's talk about what's going on. So probably the only cause for the decline of the monarch south of the border is logging, illegal logging. A lot of countries in Eastern Asia have a thirst for this timber product. They love it, they look how it looks whenever they build things with it. And so there's a huge demand for it, and lots of illegal logging occurs or has been occurring in the OML to the point that many hibernaculums have been lost. As a consequence of that, the last major hibernaculums for these butterflies are guarded by Mexican soldiers with machine guns to keep the illegal loggers out. And so it's very problematic. Every year, easily 5 to 10 illegal sawmills are shut down in Mexico City.